This is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Good. I got my Triceratops hat on today in honor of the Triceratops dinosaur.
Okay. Does that have any significance?
No, I just thought it was a cool hat.
Okay,
and
cool.
That's kind of like my thing. If I'm going to wear a hat, I think I should change it up every once in a while.
Like your jackets at conferences. You always have different jackets that you're wearing.
Yeah, that was a very expensive hobby, and we're going to a lot of conferences, so I haven't switched it up as much lately, but I don't know. I'm getting the urge to get back in there with the jackets.
Well, you've worn hats at conferences. You wore the cowboy hat at Identiverse earlier this year. I feel like did you wear a hat at Gartner last year? Because I remember we were sitting around the table talking with Head from Silverfort, and I remarked that you looked like a Vegas dealer or like an old-timey casino dealer at the table.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, other than wearing a different hat all the time, I've been working on something with one of my clients and helping them get ready for vendor demos. And I wanted to kind of bounce this off of you. And then we have a guest who is a practitioner, and I'm sure he's going to have an opinion. So after we introduce him, we'll want to get his opinion on this. But the topic is, what is your approach with vendor demos? Because I like to tell them, hey, specifically, these are the things I want to see. Hopefully there's enough buffer time at the end that if they want to do whiz-bang things, but I'd like to, structure the demo so that there's very little time for like slideware. Like if I have to sit through an hour presentation before you even share like a screen of your application, I've lost interest. So I want to get on, like, you've got 20 minutes for slides if you really want to do them. Otherwise, you can jump right in if you want to use that. I like to give specific use cases, and then I don't like to score on 100 different aspects. I want to score on those use cases, and then I want the score to be a reference point. Now if one vendor is like 10 miles ahead of the others, sure. But if you've got a cluster and they're pretty close, I think you use that information as you talk about it amongst your group. But I don't feel like you should say, oh, this vendor was a 4.5 and this one was a 4.6. We're going to go with the 4.6.
Okay,
Thoughts?
so you covered a lot of ground there. So I think the first is, what kind of demo is this? And to me, what you're describing sounds like an RFP demo of some sort, where the client is looking to purchase software of some sort or service, and they kind of want to see how that works, which I think is very different than a demo of, hey, let me just learn about your product or your service or offering, whatever it may be, as kind of generalized. So
right, yeah. So not necessarily an RFP, but like RFP style, and yes, with the interest of purchasing something.
Okay. So that's the first part, right? Is what is the purpose of the demo? Is it just general education, become aware of something, or is it an intent to buy, right, as we would say? So I'm with you. I hate slides in demos. I want to see product. I want to see specifics. How does your thing handle this thing, right? Whatever that use case looks like. So I think you're pretty generous at 20 minutes of slides. I would say no more than 5-10 minutes tops. And I would score negatively if it takes you more than 10 minutes to explain what your product does in slides, because I'm not buying your slides, I'm buying your product. So I want to see it work. And I'm with you. Be prescriptive. I think vendors actually like this as well. Tell me what you want to see, because otherwise it's like, okay, well, tell me about yourself, Jim. And it's like, okay, well, what do you want to know, right? It's like all this stuff going on. So if you can be prescriptive, especially work with a vendor and say, hey, here's the things that are important to me. You need to show me at least these things. If we have extra time, great. Show me all the gravy or bells and whistles that you got that we didn't talk about that you think makes you special, right, in the space. Cool. But I need to see these 5-10 things, right? And so I think scripting that out for the vendor is super helpful for really everybody. Say, okay, can it do this? And don't pick easy stuff either. I would,
That's right.
It's like, can your product create an Active Directory account? Well, yeah. So can hundreds of others. Like, who cares, right? Everybody could do that. Show me, things that are of concern to me. I think we're going to have trouble with this. Show me how you address that in your solution, that kind of scenario.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the demo, you have to assume multiple vendors are doing demos. And how are you going to say one is better than the other? There's got to be some kind of differentiation. I even like to suggest to the folks who are involved with the scoring, user experience, security, things like administrative experience, like factor those into your answer as you're developing a score. I don't like to get too prescriptive on that because, you might think security is more important. I might think user experience is more important, and that's okay. Maybe that's why we were both part of the selection team.
Yeah, for sure. And there may be some things you can change and some things that you can't, right? User experience, especially if you're buying a SaaS product, you're buying the user experience. Like, that's the way it works. So if you don't like that, there's very little you can do unless you're buying a solution that has like, a million different bells and cogs and switches and stuff that you can kind of adjust. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I think, at the end of the day, you want to pick a product that meets your needs both now as well as what you're skating towards to, right? From a hockey analogy, right? Where the puck is going. But what you don't want to do is buy a product on promises. Oh yeah, we'll be able to do that next quarter. Or yeah, that's on our roadmap for next year. Like, I would never assume that the product will do what it is until it's in, general release, it's in production, and I don't bank on promises.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think there is something to be said for roadmap items, but yeah, you don't want to put too much weight in them.
Yeah, but if all your key use cases are roadmap items,
yeah,
how is it helping you right now or in the next 6 months, right? Yeah, maybe if it's, hey, this is something we're releasing tomorrow, that's a little bit different, but are they going to nail it on the first try, or is there going to be a bunch of patches and bugs that you need to work through? Like, are you paying to be a guinea pig, a tester of new functionality? That always concerns me. I mean, I remember going through this a long time ago through an IGA selection, and I won't name the company, but they were literally doing development on the product at night after I had feedback during the day before to say, hey, can it do this? What about this? And it would show up with a new build of this on-premise IGA solution. It was like, oh, we added it in last night. I'm like, okay, so
is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both, because if, I shouldn't be special. I'm buying a product for identity governance. It's like, okay, it should be able to do onboarding and offboarding and access reviews. Like, that should be basic stuff. If I'm
table stakes, right?
Yeah, if I'm designing the product and they're fixing it overnight, I guess that speaks to the agility with which they respond to their customers. But why wasn't it there in the first place? This is the first time I've ever heard like basic things, like that.
It's an exceptionally agile methodology.
You're totally right, Steve.
Yeah, I agree with you guys too, in terms, especially in terms of the architecture stuff, right? Nothing drives me more insane than when I show up to a demo call and we go through, 20 slides of slideware. What I typically do is I put them on the spot, right? I will say, I'm already aware of what your product does. Here are the use cases that I'm looking to implement by leveraging your product. Let's go through those use cases. And then I usually tell them that I understand what your capabilities are, and I understand what your competitors' capabilities are. I want to hear from you what differentiates you from the competitors. We all know who they are. Sell me your wares. So usually it's a good starting point. It kind of cuts through all that stuff and gets us to a point where it's not necessarily a time waster for either side, which I think some do appreciate, right? That not everybody wants to go through all those slides. It's usually just a standardized sales pitch that they have to do.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I mean, because I think you can say, I don't need to be educated in IAM. I already know what it is, right? If you're a salesperson coming in, you don't know what the potential customer knows. So sometimes they started at the basics and it's like, yeah, I get it. I know. Like, if you can tell them, it's like, hey, look, we're an experienced IAM group. You don't need to spend 20 minutes telling us the difference between authentication and authorization, right? Or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
I love that, prescription.
I have a shameless promotion for the Identity at the Center podcast sponsored sessions.
If
you are able to watch a sponsored session and educate yourself on that particular product, it does cut through most of those things when you're making a call, which I think I gave you guys that feedback early on. Is something that I really appreciated and enjoyed when I'm looking through those products. It's invaluable to me to listen for a half an hour, 45 minutes about what someone's product does. The elevator pitch gets done there. And then by the time I'm getting to them, I'm educated about their product and we're having a relevant conversation that's really kind of pushing us to the point where we can see, is this viable for me? Or is this just, something that's slideware?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Good.
Yeah, I think that's what's great about the sponsor sessions is that they actually, some of them get more downloads than the regular sessions. And I think it's just for that reason that folks are out there in the market and are always looking for solutions. If you can kind of filter things in or out based on a 45-minute podcast, like that's awesome. That's a great use of time.
Well, not everyone has access to a Gartner or a Cooping or Cole or a Forrester either, right? They don't have an analyst at hand that they can call, and that's not, financially available to a lot of people. So it's certainly something that could help them out, and definitely a tool I would suggest that the listeners or other practitioners would leverage.
I'll disagree because you have access to Jim and me. So
that's fair.
you can ping us on LinkedIn for whatever reason. There's something in the water. I've gotten a bunch of pings in the last week or so of people who are in the product space and looking to develop something, and they want thoughts on kind of what they're thinking or validate market research or whatever it may be, right? If I have the time, I'm happy to share it with anybody out there. I will give you, my 2 cents. It may not be valuable, but at least it'll be 2 cents.
Yeah, well, with inflation, it's hardly worth anything. But
my 2 cents Canadian is worthless, essentially, right?
So you yourself are not worthless, Steve.
Okay,
you are a valued member of the team.
And we really ought to get to introducing you, but I did want to pick on one thing that Jeff said, which was hey, what's it going to do for me in 6 months? And I kind of feel especially in this day and age of software as a service, you're paying for that service full price on day one, right? The day you sign the contract, the bills start coming, and you've got to get something out in production quickly. And I think you put the vendor on the spot to say, how do I get something up and get value from this product quickly? And then you get an idea of what they think is quickly.
Yeah. I mean, time to market is not just for products. It's also for your IAM program.
Right.
How do you get something out there?
And not everything can have a 3 to 5 year program time to value, right? We're not talking about legacy IGA implementations anymore. You have to be able to show value quickly.
Yeah. Here's $1 million. I'll see you in 3 years. That doesn't cut it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we go ahead and introduce you, Steve, formally, since we've already got conversation going. So for people who don't know Steve, I'm not sure who would that be because we see you at conferences all the time, but Steve Rennick, he's a senior leader for IAM Architecture at Ciena. Very easy for me to say. Steve, you've been with us a couple times now. I think we were counting before we hit record. I think it's your 3.5 time on. First time was way back at Gartner in 2023, so a couple years ago. You were with us at Squabble at Identiverse earlier this year. You're part of Jim's team. And then today is 3. And then the half is a long time ago. We asked a bunch of people, what's the difference between digital identity and identity and access management? So we played a clip that you graciously sent in and kind of had a conversation on that. So welcome back for the 3.5 time, if that makes sense.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. I am the Identity at the Center fanboy. So I'm constantly listening. And even when I found you guys, I think it was an interesting thing where I stumbled across it and I listened to an episode and I was immediately hooked. Right? It really helped me to get a perspective of what other people were seeing and ask them questions about. And I was pretty early on in my identity journey, at least, what I consider to be the identity journey at Ciena. And I went back and I listened to every episode from the start to catch everything back up and then got level set.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, a lot of things have changed and adapted and adopted, and you guys have done really well. So I'm proud to be here. Certainly proud to tell anybody I can about the value of the show, and I just appreciate everything you guys do. So.
Well, I appreciate that. I always cringe when somebody says they went back and listened to early episodes because, they sound like crap. They sound like we didn't know what we're doing. And that's the truth. The content I thought was good, but the audio quality was definitely not there. And then we started doing video, I don't know, about a year and a half ago at this point. So you've been early on with us. So definitely appreciate your support for the years. We saw you at Identiverse. You were part of the Squabble team. So that was your first time being part of, I think, this kind of game show thing. And, we did one recently at Authenticate, Fido Feud Round 2. Stay tuned. The video for that will be coming out hopefully by the end of the year. If you were there, you know how it ended. I won't spoil it any more than I already have in some other episodes that might be coming up, but it was a lot of fun. We've got other game shows that we're going to be pulling out for Identiverse and DC later this year. I think it's November 19th and 20th, if I recall. And then Gartner, we're going to do another one as well, which is, and both of them are called Majority Rules. So I actually tested this out at SailPoint Navigate a couple weeks ago. It went pretty well. The audience really liked it. I've got to work on some of the, specifics around the questions, how it works out. If you're going to be at Identiverse DC or Gartner in Grapevine, Texas in December, please come check out the session. We have a new game show. It is audience participation. Use your phone to play. It's called Majority Rules. So we have a good time with that. So with all that said, what was it like being part of the losing team again for, Jim, you're 0 for 2 at this point with Family Feud style games, but take me behind the scenes. What was the strategy going in?
I still struggle with the losing team side. I think there's some controversy around a couple of the answers, and I know Mr. David Motti would agree with me that I think maybe one of those things could have shifted the tide in our favor. So I definitely think that it was a wonderful experience. The crowd participation was great. Everybody was having fun. And I guess that's the whole point. I really enjoyed it, and I was excited to be up there in front of everybody. And we're right beside the NHI pavilion too, so there was lots of activity happening around, and lots of people standing around and watching too, not just the seated participants. But it was a fun experience. I still say that we should have had a ruling around the machine identity versus service accounts or whatever it was. Yeah.
I think that's the hard part is, you put judges on the spot, and, we had judges there as well. And this has so far happened in every game that we've done that has been like that, where you're trying to interpret, okay, is this answer close enough to that one, or how specific do we need to be? So it is a lot of fun. I certainly enjoy it. And I get a kick out of some of the answers that we get, from people and sort of the reactions and stuff like that. So it was definitely a good time. Past that, what have you been up to, I guess, since, what was that, June of this year? So it's been 3-4 months since then.
Yeah. I've had a couple of panels and speaking engagements and webinars and things, pretty much all related to non-human identities, which I think we're going to touch on a little bit today. The hot topic, and obviously it's something that touches most infrastructures and organizations, and very few I think are handling it in a way that we would think would be a good way to handle it, right? I think a lot of it gets ignored, and there's a lot of tech debt there. So trying to spread the word and give some ideas about how we might solve for those things as practitioners. So I did Identity Week America, which was a good experience, and then most recently I attended Sector, which is Black Hat North, I guess, Toronto. So that was an interesting perspective for me. Got humbled a few times in a few sessions. We're deeply technical on the cyber side, but definitely learned a lot and felt like it was really a worthwhile time. Good to cross over, I think. If you stick just to the identity conferences, typically you'll see a lot of repeated content. I'm sure you guys see the same thing. You travel to a lot of those as well. But sometimes flipping in a cyber conference gives you a different perspective, and I'm really big on perspective. So it's a good thing for me.
So Steve, you played a role in Mr. NHI latest NHI workshop at Identiverse, and I thought it was a great event. And I thought you're one of the highlights. First off, it's just like you had like a very powerful practitioner-based perspective. So I don't want to answer my question for you, but my question is like, what do you figure is like the unique piece that you bring to the conversation?
I think in that particular instance, there's been a lot of vendor focus, right? So it seems like the vendors are the ones that are driving what we're learning about non-human identities, right? And one of the biggest things that I see is that many of the solutions that are available to us as practitioners are things that are helping us to not necessarily remediate the tech debt, but make it a little bit better, right? So, I think I use the terminology in some cases, it's like putting lipstick on a pig, right? So you have a bad tech debt problem, you've got an issue with something, and we're going to make it a little bit better. So I would give you an example. in the instance of having a service account, right? You might discover the service account, and you might see the credential hasn't been rotated in X number of years, and that might be a compliancy issue. And now you need to find an owner and have that owner rotate the credential. Doing that visibility-wise through an NHI solution is relatively easy. It's a centralized location where you can plug into all your different IDPs and pull all those things in there, and then see them. But realistically, if you don't address the root of the problem, which is why do you have the service account? Why isn't the credential being rotated on a regular basis? Is there something else that you could be doing that wouldn't require you to have the service account and have the credential rotated on a regular basis, i.e. something that isn't a static secret? If you don't go through that checklist, you are basically just going to have to keep going back over and over and over and over again to solve for those things. Now, there are portions of your environment where it's just unavoidable tech debt. It's legacy. It's something where, you kind of have a tier, and I don't want to get too deep into it because I'm sure we'll talk about it later. But I kind of look at it like an approach of a tiered approach. If I have an account of this type, so I'll use the example of a Windows-based service account, tier 1 for me might be that the credential is vaulted in an enterprise solution and it is rotated automatically. So ownership is purely to say, do you need this lifecycle wise? It's never to go and say, hey, it's audit time again. Time for you to change the password, do this thing, right? So you'd have that tier, and then you're probably going to have things that don't support the automatic rotation. So in that instance, you're kind of getting down to the idea of, well, we need to rotate it at least once every 365 days, if that's your policy. And here's how we do it in a streamlined fashion. Here is where you're going to have to change that password. Here is all that information to make it easy on you when it comes time to do that. And you can plan those things ahead of time. And then, of course, the last part is just, you don't have the choice of doing that, or no one can't find an owner, and you kind of have to leave it as an exception. And then you probably would look at compensating controls to try and restrict what that service can do. So,
I feel like I realize why NHI is getting so much spotlight. I think, Zero Trust got a lot of spotlight, and then it got turned into a marketing buzz or marketing term. Same thing with AI. And look, Zero Trust is no joke. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the most significant things, like architectural frameworks we have in cybersecurity. I think that obviously AI is no joke either. But I don't think NHI is a joke either. And I do see it popping up more in like marketing literature. The reason I'm bringing all this up is I think there is a big difference between NHIs and human identities. I feel like we've got a set of best practices around managing human identities, especially on the workforce side, right? It's like there should be a source of truth that, like an HR system, you should use multi-factor authentication. Well, let's just take those two examples. In NHI land, there is no multi-factor authentication for the most part, right? I've seen some point solutions out there and they're neat, but for broad scale adoption, it's not really probably going to happen, in my opinion. System of record. I mean, who creates all their NHIs in a system of record? It's just not even if you did have a set of best practices, that wouldn't be one of them. So how do we solve this? I mean, I feel like there's a lot of smart people working on the problem, but it's such a hard problem.
Yeah. Well, I would say this. If you're walking around with a hammer for long enough, everything starts looking like a nail, right? And I think the issue is, as identity practitioners, we are looking at all of these NHI issues with an identity lens on. And that identity lens has been primarily focused on workforce and human identities for a very long time. And I kind of want to go back to something else that you said in that too, is like, we feel like we have a pretty good grasp on human identities. I think most organizations still struggle with some of those things, right? They still struggle. And it's been many, many years where we supposedly had the checkbox on those things, MFA everywhere. And to your point, streamlined life cycle across your entire organization. The problem with NHIs is that they are so different in so many different ways. And I also want to say, the NHI term is kind of really, really broad, and we're kind of just throwing a bunch of stuff into that term, when realistically the ones that we're probably talking about are kind of like the machine identities, but we also include personal access tokens and API keys and all those other things, and they're all going to be treated differently. And I think that's one of the bigger differentiators for me is human identities are relatively easy to classify and keep in a category. But you're going to have subcategorizations of NHIs that are going to be treated entirely different in your environment, not just from a lifecycle perspective, but as you mentioned, an authentication and authorization perspective. So, it's vast and it's bigger than human identities or workforce identities. And we still haven't done all the things we need to do on that side. And now we're faced with all of these things. And I think that's why we see it kind of tailing back a little bit. You're bang on. No system of truth, no source of record, no way to really do life cycle. How do you maintain ownership? How do we do the notion of least privilege for these things and make sure that that's somehow maintained over time? Life cycle for non-human identities, you could argue in certain cases should not be directly tied to a human. There may be a human in a loop, but in the instance of an application or a container, why wouldn't you want to try and join those together? And that way, when the life cycle of the application is over, i.e. you're sunsetting this application, all the non-human identities that are associated with that application would subsequently be sunsetted as well or decommissioned in that sense, right? Rather than this idea of, oh yeah, well, we didn't use that app for the last 2 or 3 years. It's gone now. And I've pulled in an NHI solution and now I see that there's still 5 service accounts and 3 API keys and a bunch of other things that were associated with that. And they've just been sitting there for that length of time, right? So,
yeah, I want to follow up on a point you made there. The term NHI, I almost feel like it's become controversial, right? We had Felix on the show a few months ago, and he doesn't like the term. I almost kind of think it's like just a bucket, almost like to help the human brain organize things. Okay, you have humans and then you have not humans, just like you have employees and non-employees. I mean, the non-employee population means a lot of different things, but generally speaking, it does mean human beings. But when you get into the non-human identities, you've got devices, you've got, generally speaking, workloads, but even within workloads, you've got service accounts and not service accounts. And the not service accounts have always been hard to manage. And now with Terraform and things like that, it's just a whole new ball game. But I even think machine identities, maybe that's too general of a term. Maybe we're talking about devices, because device, and here I am, Jeff Troy, I can't believe he's using the term device identity. But here I am, I'm saying device identity, because it's part of the zero trust framework, right? If I can match Steve up to a device I know Steve uses, and I can either it's a managed device or it's passed some kind of health check, I'm going to let Steve move forward and have access to this resource. And then also on machines, I've got thermostats and other things that, those are the ones I really don't think have identities. I think they just have accounts, they authenticate, they report data, etc. All right, I'm not going to go down that road. But
Jim, how can you have an account without an identity?
Oh my gosh. I'm not going to go into this, Jeff. Right, otherwise, we will never get back to Steve.
Here's a thought on the nomenclature, though, right? So this idea, I don't think it matters, right? And this is just my opinion. I only bring up the NHI thing because it's a hot topic. Some people like it, some people don't. I'm kind of the mindset, as long as we're talking about it and it's bringing awareness to what that might mean in organizations from a practitioner's perspective, I don't care what you call it, because the notion of subclassification is going to happen regardless. Further to what I was just saying before, right? You've got 10, 20, 30, 50 different types of non-human identities. And, your standards and compliancy metrics for each one of those are going to be vastly different. So you're going to have to subcategorize all of them. So call it all NHI if you want, and then subcategorize the type of non-human identity, and then go from there. Because let's face it, when we get to the point where we're developing policy against these things, nomenclature does matter, right? So calling it an NHI is fine, but then, a subcategorization explicitly calling out the type of non-human identity is going to be critical, because there's going to be differences in policy and compliancy requirements against each and every one, right?
So I'm going to say something rare. I agree with Jim somewhat in that there is, I think the human brain likes to put things in buckets. So you've got humans and you've got non-humans. And then under humans, you've got employees, contractors, partners, customers, citizens, blah, 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 right? And on the non-human side, you've got machines, devices, agents, service accounts, right? All that kind of stuff. So I want to try and simplify this for the people who are like, I don't know what the heck these guys are talking about anymore. So when we talk about NHIs, like, what should people know about that? Are they just a alternative form of like a human identity? It's still an account. It still has a secret assigned to it, either a password or a certificate or something. You still need to create them. You still need to remove them. You still need to change their authorizations. Is that too simple of a way of looking at NHI? Or are there other things that, as a practitioner, I should know about NHI from your perspective, Steve?
I think that's okay. Honestly, I think it's okay to simplify things and then kind of dig deeper as you get into it. I would say that there are some instances where we're kind of talking about secrets and not necessarily identities when it comes to NHIs. They just get glommed together, and we end up solving for it in one way, because no one really wants to own secrets management overall in organizations anyway, right? So this is kind of bringing awareness to it, and a lot of the NHI solutions are starting to focus heavily on secrets managers, because they know that's where the information they need is, right? That's where the visibility is. And then subsequently being able to transition potentially between secrets managers where you need to is an added benefit to organizations. So like, that's one thing I know it's kind of branching off of what you were asking, but it is one benefit that I'm seeing from some NHI solutions where historically it would be challenging to have a single pane of glass. I hate that I just said that. Related to secrets management, right? There used to be, in the old days, a notion that we would build it and they would come. So I am going to put an enterprise secrets manager in our company, and everybody is going to come to it, and that's where they're going to get their secrets, and that's where they're going to do their vaulting, and everybody's going to come to it. We're all going to be happy, and there's only one place to look. There'll be nowhere else. That didn't last very long, right? Cloud came, SaaS came, the expansion came, and even when it was located in on-prem, all kinds of shadow organizations that were doing secrets management in their own ways. So I think one of the things that inadvertently NHI solutions are looking to solve is that ability to just meet you where you are. And as a practitioner or a stakeholder related to that is incredibly important, right? So if I go to a developer and I say, hey, guess what? You're operating in AWS right now, and I know that you have a lot of features and functionalities that you like with Key Manager, but I need you to come and use X solution. They're going to say no. And if they did say yes, they'd say yes for one or two things, and then they'd go around me and do it some other way. So the thing that it's solving for is a centralized location where you can have visibility into multiple secrets managers across your clouds, across your on-prem environments, and then being able to actually have visibility and actionability into each one of those things. So it's kind of an added benefit that could be a selling feature for folks, if they're looking to solve for that. But I think the meeting them where they are is really important. And again, the point gets even further when you're talking about how to control non-human identities, or kind of rein them in, which I assume we'll chat about at some point here too. So,
well, I like that tenet of meeting people where they are, because you're absolutely right. People are like water; they will flow around the rock. And the rock in this case is like an enterprise vault that nobody wants to use because it just sucks. What are some other things that you can think of? So what I'm thinking here is like, okay, if you could go back in time, knowing what you know now, and say, okay, we need to get a handle around NHI for our organization. What are like the first 2 or 3 steps that you would take, that if someone out there is listening today and they're like, man, I don't even know where to start. Like, how would I get through this? Like, what are the first 2 or 3 things to think about to kind of get them started on their path?
Yeah, I think, if you already have an environment that you've inherited and you can't start net new, that's the question, right? We're not talking about a net new greenfield. We're talking about, I have an environment that I need to address. I think visibility is key, right? You have to know what you're dealing with. And if you don't, you can't really address it in the way that you'd need to. So getting something that can provide you visibility into what non-human identities or service accounts that you have in your organization is a really good starting point. I would say the next one is tied to Jim's idea, or the thing that he said earlier about there's no system of true source of record. So that's a real problematic thing. And we saw it early on with service accounts where they were just being created ad hoc. I need a service account. Great. You created a ticket. It came to the account management team and somebody provisioned that service account in an ad hoc way. So they did it this way for this account, and the next one that came in, they did it a different way. There was no standardization or automation in place to say, these are the attributes and things that I need to have for these service accounts to make them manageable over time. A reasonable description, an owner, absolutely, classification within your directory services, like those would all be important things. If you don't do that, we hear this term all the time, your data is not clean, your identity data is not clean. That one drives me a little bit crazy because I haven't met anyone yet who can tell me what clean identity data looks like, and that I can just take that and just make my data clean and then kind of walk away and retire, right? I love the idea of that, but I would love if someone could steer me in the right direction to even some documentation or something that says this is what it should look like. So it's that, right? You're creating tech debt by doing things ad hoc. So that would be the second thing I would say is make sure that you have a standardized process for each type of non-human identity that you're creating. Don't create things ad hoc. It may be in different locations, right? Because there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen. This is another issue with non-human identity creation is it's not just the identity team that's creating them. For service accounts and Active Directory, you kind of have an advantage because you could say, this is how all accounts get created here, and these are the people that can do it. Now you have cloud, now you have SaaS, now you have local accounts on various things, and it's very unwieldy. So the visibility will help with that. The classification would be something that you would have to address, and then standardization of what it should look like in an ideal state for each one of those non-human identity types.
Steve, I love the way you talk about these things. You said you dropped the term agile. Like when you jumped into the fray here, you dropped the term agile, and I think agile is great. I think Scrum is great if it follows the Scrum process. If it's just like, hey, we're just going to do 15-minute stand-ups and then we're just going to go off and work on what we want, and it's just a way to not do project planning, I think it's crap. So why am I bringing that up? I also think this term source of record gets abused sometimes where you'll say, okay, what's your source of record for your contractors? And somebody will tell me Active Directory or, Entra. And I'm like, that's not a system of record. You're just trying to bypass the process and not really manage the contractors and just put them into Active Directory. So I know it's kind of off topic, but because you brought up the system of record topic and all that, I wanted to get your opinion. Can Active Directory be a system of record?
Can Active Directory be a system of record for non-human identities? It kind of lends me to the idea of that there would be something that would be providing it with information that we could build lifecycle off of. I think it's a challenge to have it in Active Directory. I'm not sure Active Directory is the right place for that. I guess it could be if you had a streamlined automated process that said, here is our intake for these type of accounts. And that was followed to a T, right? So this idea of, you could even create do it through your ITSM. I'm requesting a service account. Here are all the things that I need. Once that's approved by whoever needs to approve it, and you'll have that chain as well, then the provisioning happens at that point. And subsequently, there's a record that gets associated with that describes why it was requested and all of that. It's great to have that system of record, but then how do you do it with updates, right? So if let's just say Workday was my system of truth or source of record for human identities, if I change something in Workday, that's going to propagate out into everything else. If your source of record is the intake process, we would almost have to make the ITSM that, right? So that if change happened there, it'd be reflected. But that could be catastrophic if you're not careful with which attributes that you're changing, right? So let's just say it changed an attribute that you were doing automation with related to that account somewhere in your directory, i.e., OU structure, a tag or whatever, and you had built things around that, and someone in the ITSM system said, oh, well, now we're going to update this attribute on these things. It could break a lot of stuff. So you really would have to keep track of dependencies. I think it's doable. Would I recommend it? Probably not.
Yeah, I think this is where, and not all NHIs are created equal, can kind of come up, right? I think for service accounts, you should put it where you request it first, say what you want, it goes through some kind of quality check, and then it gets provisioned. Service accounts, that makes sense. But there are other environments that need to spin up accounts more quickly, or the account is already kind of preloaded. Maybe you're changing the password or something, and it needs to be discovered. And I kind of feel like that's a large part of the NHI technology model is like start with discovery, see what NHI or machine identities are out there already. Do you agree with that? Is it like a discover first, or is it a not all NHIs are built the same and different scripts for different folks?
Is the question related to like, what would you recommend companies start with? Like as kind of like, here's the first thing you do, visibility is the first thing you do, and then kind of move on. Is that, yeah. I feel like education is the first step, right? So I think you have to educate your stakeholders in terms of what you're doing, right? You have to define what a non-human identity is and why it's important to you and them, right? Because they may not understand that. They know the things that they need to do in their environments. And you kind of know from your identity lens what you need to accomplish from a non-NHI perspective. So I think, having those discussions and getting everybody on the same page in terms of what it all means is probably step one. Step two is 100% visibility, right? Like, well, there's a people part of that too, right? So I think you get the idea of here's what we're going to call it across the board, but then you have stakeholders. And I really like what Felix had said previously about this. So I'm going to not steal his thunder, but, kind of leverage what he had said previously. And that is creating a working group of the people that are going to be involved in this is critical. I don't think you want to do it if you don't have all of your stakeholders at the table. And it shouldn't be in the notion of we are doing this and here's what your piece of it is. It should be tell us what you're doing. You have to come into that with open eyes and open ears and listen to them about what they need or why they're doing the thing they're doing right now. It can't be you're doing a bad thing, we need to fix the bad thing. That's never well received. But what is well received is when you walk into the room and you say, it looks like you guys are spending a lot of extra time provisioning these non-human identities and rotating secrets. Look, I'd love to help. Can you talk me through why you're doing the things that you are right now? And then maybe we can come up with something better. I'm looking at an NHI solution that, may have something that would benefit you. Let's talk, right? It's a far more effective way of getting people on board with what you're doing when you're listening and not telling, right? So I would say that that's the people part. Visibility we talked about. You got to connect everything in, otherwise you're going to miss parts of your environment. And then we kind of got into the idea of the classification, different types of non-human identities, and then you have the idea of posture management around those too, right? So I've discovered them all. What's bad about them? What's good about them? What are the immediate problems, right? You're going to have to level set on that once you see everything, because you can't unsee it, right? Like you're going to be looking at something and there's going to be a lot of critical issues that are going to come up. This hasn't been rotated in 5 years. This has admin access to this thing or that thing. And like, once you know that, you can't unknow it, and you are going to have to address it. And if that is at a large scale, you're going to have to eat the elephant in consumable chunks, because it's not going to be reasonable for you to say, well, we're going to remediate everything, because you really don't even know what you're dealing with. So that visibility side and then that categorization, the idea of doing some kind of detection and response related to it would also be good. And then, your table stakes like credential rotation, vaulting, certificate management, fill in the blank. And then of course, the last part, which would be like, how do I get rid of them when I don't need them? How do I know when I don't need them? How do I know when they're dormant? What metrics do I use? Because it's not necessarily like a service account where you can just go to Active Directory and say, one was not that this is a diehard thing that you should base all your metrics off of, but it's a reasonable metric. when was the last time it logged in? When did it log on interactively? What can I see in the logs that tell me that it might be dormant, right? It's a bigger challenge when you kind of get things that are spread out into, now you're talking about potentially local accounts in a SaaS environment, not just the federated ones that you have and stuff that an administrator corrected, or a local account on a server somewhere, right? These are all difficult things to deal with. So figuring out life cycle from those based on what you see in a centralized location at least gives you a head start. Sorry, I kind of rambled on there.
No, it's a lot of good stuff going on. I feel like there's so much we can cover here. And I have to take a step back sometimes, because it's like, okay, how are we going to address this? And I keep thinking about urgency and speed and fear. And, and some more of that is, why do you think NHI is so hot right now? Because every conference has had a thing about it. It seems like there's a new product every 20 minutes coming out that is like going to solve all your NHI problems. And my thought process is, look, this is not a new problem. This has been around forever. We've had non-human identities forever, right? Even service accounts and probably mainframe accounts and punch cards before that, right? All kinds of stuff. But I think what's driving it for me, and I'm curious if you agree or have a different perspective, is this explosion of AI. And AI doing everything, and all these agentic AIs and things, not people, things that are going to need accounts to do things on behalf of other things or people. And the fear of, oh my gosh, this scenario where, we have a good handle on our service accounts, it's these 150 in our organization, all of a sudden becomes exponential, because there's so many things that are going to start talking to each other, especially from that agentic perspective. And I'm curious if that fear, you think, is what's driving the hotness of NHI right now, or if it's something else.
I think it's a couple of things. I don't think it's a pat on the back for us, but I think when you think about how threat actors typically attack companies now, they don't break in, they log in, right? And we've done a much better job because of awareness over the last 5, 6, 7 years in terms of getting MFA in front of things of all different types. Like, some FA is better than no MFA, argue amongst yourselves. But because we've done a decent job with that, it's kind of forced people into the shadows. And by people, I mean the people that want to do bad things, right? If you can't easily log into an account, well, then, move on to the next easiest thing. And it's ripe for the picking when we think about non-human identities, right? They don't have MFA against them, as Jim mentioned earlier. It's there are some solutions that can do things like that, but for the most part, they don't have it, because it would be really impossible to implement, because there's nobody to attest to, that or answer to the multi-factor authentication. So you have that portion of it, and then you have the fact that they're overprivileged. So they're overprivileged in most cases, right? When you think about it, when someone installed an application and they set a service account in the old days, what did they tell you they needed? Because they didn't know what they needed. Just give it domain admin and we'll figure it out from there. So traditionally, and it still happens today, we give more permission than we need because we don't want to go through the effort of understanding what that is. So my point here is, if it's not easy for threat actors to get through human accounts, it's going to be really easy for them to do these things, because there's no MFA, so they don't have that hurdle. And oftentimes these have the privilege that they need to either create other identities or tokens or things like that in your environment. And we're seeing more breaches happen that way. So I think it's a combination of the two. I think AI has improved their ability to do things from a nefarious perspective. It's made it much easier to find those things. It's made it much easier to exploit those things. Not just phishing campaigns and things like that, although they've improved significantly as well. But I think the fact that NHIs are typically ripe for the picking because of the way that they're configured and managed, and there is no real life cycle against them, it's easy for them to find one of those to exploit. And then again, the privilege helps them just to move laterally and do more things that they need to do in an environment. So I don't think we see a lot of breaches being tied to non-human identities. There's probably a couple new ones every day. There's probably hundreds that we don't see, right? It's just that same old story where it's happening, but we're not talking about it. So yeah, that would be kind of why I think it's a hot topic right now. And and why it needs to be addressed. The problem existed, but it used to be super easy to get credentials. Now it's harder to get credentials from humans, arguably, but it's easy to get these. And they're not within your four walls anymore, right? We don't have the castle and moat anymore. We've opened that up, and now identity is at the center. Shameless plug. And so we're able to exploit that in any number of ways. And it's not just a human identity, it's non-human identities and machine identities throughout every infrastructure.
Well, thanks for the plug. I'm just kind of thinking about the whole topic of, kind of that escalation to the service accounts. And this is why, I think it's just so critical what you're talking about. And probably, I like to always have within our show kind of things that are actionable that people can take away. If you're not thinking about those service accounts that have been around for a long time, that are probably over provisioned, like, you got to get those under control. Like, that's got to be one of your high priority items for this year. Generally doesn't take a lot of budget, something that you can do without budget. The hard part is your starting point. Your starting point is someone created that account back in the 90s and nobody shut it off since. So
yeah.
Jeff and I were preparing for a resilience and recovery show today, where it's the standard escalation path. It starts with what you talked about. The bad guys don't break in, they log in, and then they try to take over an account with weak credentials, no MFA, or get a help desk account and just reset the passwords. So, you almost have to think about that.
It's a challenge too as a practitioner in an organization, because it's not glamorous, right? When you go back to your management and you say, hey, listen, I got to assign 3 people to go through all these non-human identities and find owners and remediate them and change the passwords and find where they are and not break the business. And that's going to take me 6 months to a year to do that for the 1,000 NHIs that we have that we're dealing with. That's not something that people typically are like, yeah, okay, great. Here's a pat on the back and here's the money to do that. It's more like, why do we need that? Like, why can't we just have AI do that? Or, fill in the blank, right? It's not glamorous. And so I think that because it's hard work and it's not something that's shiny and showcasey, it gets ignored a lot. Well, we won't worry about that. It's okay. We don't want to take the risk of breaking the business versus the risk of the potential security breach for your password that's 8 characters and reused 20 different times for 20 different accounts in the organization, and no one's changed it for 12 years, right?
Yeah. It's unfortunate that it even comes back to passwords. I don't ever want to say the word password again, but
yeah, we're not there yet. Yeah, we're getting there though, right? There's a lot of improvement. You said something earlier too, and I wanted to circle back on it because it was a really good point. And it's basically this notion of like, how do we provision these things or create them in a way that's standardized for us. And again, here's the lens, the traditional IAM lens, where we're like, bring it into one place and have everybody come to us and we'll take care of provisioning. And then we know it's going to be done right. You're essentially crippling the business and productivity at that point too, right? So the challenge with non-human identities is like, you're going to have to allow them to be created in all of those different places in order for you to maintain your level of efficiency, effectiveness in those organizations, allowing your engineers, your users, or whomever to do things at the speed in which they need to do them. So, tailing off something where you can talk to them about, well, you're provisioning them this way now, standardize that or create it in an automated fashion, but do that in your area, like a governance model for those things in each one of those areas is a challenge, but it's something that needs to be done. And Jim, when you were at the non-human identity workshop, I said something in one of those sessions, and it was the term NHI whack-a-mole. And that's what ends up happening here, right? Is you fix the problem, or you see the problem, you identify it, you remediate it, and then it just comes back again, or a new one pops up because it's being created ad hoc in these environments, right? So if you don't get a grasp on that idea of how can we meet them where they are, how can we not impede the speed of business, but create things in an automated fashion so that we're not playing NHL whack-a-mole forever, I think is part of the thing that is a challenge to solve for. Now, clouds, maybe you have a cloud team, and maybe that cloud team has a governance model. Talk to them. Tell them that, this is an issue for it. They should be a stakeholder. They should have a seat at the table. They should describe to you why they're creating those. Your developers, CI/CD, you have to know what they're doing. Because the problem is, and I think Felix brought it up, half the time people come to the identity teams and say, here's a problem that I have. And we say, yeah, let's create you a service account and move you on your way, when there are better ways of doing it. So, educating ourselves, we'll learn a lot by talking to them. And, I think we should all, be humbled once in a while and listen and look and learn about what you're ultimately hopeful to support and help with, because we're all in this together. So if we can help them out and make their lives easier, there's your KPI and your win that everybody wants to see. I made it such that developers, I didn't impede them at all, and now they're doing things in a secure way. It's a win, right? I think those things are things that you need to address and hopefully solve for collaboratively, rather than thou shalt do it the way I say you should do it.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't work. This is a very similar challenge to what we saw when cloud platforms started showing up in the enterprise. It was like, oh yeah, they've got a couple of EC2 instances. They use them for dev. A year later, it was like, oh yeah, it's production and there's 100 servers. And it's like, oh, I better do something about this. I'm the identity practitioner. But if you just went in and kicked down the walls and said, hey, all accounts that you need have to go through ServiceNow, and then they'll get provisioned, and we have a 48-hour SLA, you're going to impede the business. You're going to become the most unpopular person in the department. So don't do that. But at the same time, you can't just say, okay, well, I got here too late, I'm not going to do anything. I think what you have to do is kind of what you're talking about. This is why I say, there's an element of being political. That sounds like such a dirty word these days, but, shaking hands, kissing babies, but also just working with other people, seeing them as important peers, and you have to arrive at a solution together. Hey, we need to have visibility over the entire enterprise environment. We need to do X, Y, and Z, and then get them on board with what you're trying to accomplish and see if you can find a way to accomplish that. I think the same thing applies with NHIs. We're getting to the table late because I think NHIs started 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but they're much more prevalent now. So it is a bigger issue, and we just can't go in and kick down the walls. The point I wanted to make also, I think earlier when we were talking about AI, is we're talking about like this AI versus AI. I think of it as like spy versus spy. We defend ourselves with AI. It is a foregone conclusion some people are going to get through the wall. And hopefully AI can help prevent that as much as possible by identifying these like headless browsers or whatever it is about their context makes them look fishy. Or after they get in the door and they start doing weird things, shutting them off. That's AI for IAM, really. I want to ask you about IAM for AI. So in other words, I've got these new business applications that are leveraging chat or Gemini. Maybe it's Copilot. I feel like Copilot, it's kind of a Microsoft-centric solution. So if you're on Entra ID, it's like you just leverage that. But I don't think that's going to be enough for the business, for most businesses. And I think they're going to build their own recipe on an in-house AI platform. So it's going to get even trickier. Have you given this topic much thought? Do you have in your mind a framework or an approach to doing IAM for AI?
I have a lot of opinions about this. It's probably not surprising. I think there's a lot of really good thought going out for this right now. One of the things that I kind of stick to here is the idea that we're new on all these things, right? Specifically related to agentic AI and in AI in general. And we're moving faster than we did with anything else, right? It's the worst it's going to be right now, and it's only going to get better, and it's only going to get more complex and more complicated. I hate to keep going back and playing the repeater, but we talked a little bit earlier about like looking things through a traditional IAM lens and maybe not looking at things as we should, because this is not a use case that we've seen before. It's going to be vastly different than what we've seen before. And to your point, there's a lot of underlying requirements and dependencies that we're going to see for agentic AI, specifically around data modeling, data classification, data loss prevention, data, right? If you don't have an understanding of what your data is and where it is, you're going to be in real trouble when you unleash an AI of any kind against it, right? Specifically around the authorization piece, because I think that we haven't solved for that one. That's one where, as an industry, we've focused primarily on authentication, and we've kind of left authorization on its own, right? We do it individually on an application by application basis. In most cases, it's really difficult to decouple that. We don't spend much time focusing on that, although there are folks that are trying to do that now, like Offsend is a great example of people who are taking this the right way and trying to drive us forward. I bring this up because it's going to get much worse with agentic AI, right? Now we have MCP, now we have A2A. It's not just agents that have access to things, it's agents that have access to agents that have access to agents that have access to things and stuff. And they are going to do what they need to do to get their job done by whatever means they have, right? So it's not gonna say, well, hang on a minute, you're asking for something that I probably shouldn't give you. It's gonna say, oh yeah, I have this information over there if you haven't put the correct guardrails on it. So where I was going with the idea of like using the IAM, traditional IAM focused lens on agentic AI is we still haven't really gone down the road of developing protocols and standards specific to this because it's so new. We're trying to make it work with what we have, right? And we've gone through this exercise before, right? So we're trying to use OAuth, right? Awesome. So we've appended OAuth now, that we can do some extra things in it that we couldn't do before. And that's helping us with this use case of I'm going to operate on behalf of Steve to do this thing. So please use what Steve has access to as your guardrail for what you need. But it's not fine-grained enough. It's not control. It doesn't provide enough control for us to do the things that we need to do with agentic AI. So I think, honestly, there are lots of really smart people creating a lot of really cool frameworks. Right before Identiverse, Patrick Parker released, a thought of his, just like a framework of what we could talk about. I don't know if you saw it, but you should check it out. And he called it area. I don't know if it's because that's where the conference was and he was being, I don't know him well enough to know if he made that correlation. I have to assume he did, but ARIA. I don't know what the acronyms stand for. Somebody will be able to look it up. But it was this framework basically talking about just that, right? We're going to have to be able to identify these things with a very unique identifier that it says is an agent. We're going to have to be able to do an authorization model that happens at runtime. We can't do things at admin time with these things because we need them in the moment. We also have to have it be contextual, right? We can't have something change in the environment and you say you have access to do all these things and now there's a vulnerability or a patch or something that's not available. We still allow you to access those things. So all of these things. And then for the agents themselves, you're going to have zero knowledge proofs and be able to do that whole you are who you say you are, that verification is going to have to happen between the agents. So there's a lot of moving parts in this. And I think in pockets we're solving for it, but I suspect when, talking to a few people in the industry who are much closer and much smarter than I am in these spaces, they're telling me that it's coming relatively soon in terms of some standards that we may be able to use to help build this out in a better way. So I don't really have like an exact framework that you should use for it. I just really feel like the authorization piece is going to have to be a big part of whatever we solve for.
And that ARIA is agent relationship based identity and authorization.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll find a link to it. It was a LinkedIn post I think that I saw a while back. So I'll look for that and put that in our show notes here. I feel like we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg when it comes to authorization.
Yeah.
That has been sort of like the shadow, in the room for so long. And now there's finally some traction around trying to figure out, but I have a feeling we're in for decades of pain. And I don't mean that like, I literally decades of pain, because think of how many applications you're using today and how many of them have, long life cycles, ERP systems, Active Directory is still around, right? Things like that. SAP. They're not going to go off and change their authorization model. which means we're going to be in this weird spot for the next probably few decades while we're figuring out what does a standard authorization model look like. Will we even get there? I have no idea, but I'm encouraged by folks that are working on things like AuthZen, OPA, Cedar, right? Stuff like that. You know, if ARIA takes off, right? That kind of thing. So definitely would want to get to that at some point.
I think one thing that gets slept on in that too is the audit side of it, right? The technology exists to be able to do policy-based access control, and you know, it's pretty well documented. There's a lot of solutions out there that can do that for you. But when you have an auditor coming in that doesn't understand maybe how that works, it's going to take a lot of time for them to come around on, you know, that actually makes sense, right? Like that it's at at runtime, not admin time. So you're not looking for what role the person had or what permission they had. They have permission to do it, but they have to meet the criteria of the policy to be able to access the resource on said date and said time. So I really feel like, yeah, I mean, I get excited about it because I think that that's the way of the future. And let's face it, if we can do something that eliminates the idea of having to do campaigns, certifications, or anything else, the rubber stamping that, you know, we all adore so much and everyone loves doing, you know, I'm all for it. But I think to your point earlier, Jim, too, right, if we're really going to adopt a zero trust methodology in our environments, we can't do things at admin time. We can't go back to this notion of you just have standing privilege everywhere. I don't think the notion of zero standing privilege is achievable, but I think where you can, you should do things like just-in-time provisioning, or you should do policy-based access control of some kind so that there is some kind of context or something that says you can access it now and something's changed and now you can't, right? Versus this always on permission.
So I will disagree slightly in that I do think zero standing privilege is achievable.
Okay.
But not yet, because it requires, you know, data and it requires automation for it to be there. And frankly, most companies aren't even there yet. So I think it's kind of like this continuous identity thing is part of zero standing privileges, is part of zero trust. All these things require good data, clean data, right? Sparkly clean. It requires timely data, and it requires orchestration and automation for it to work. Are we going to get there? I think so. I don't think we have a choice. I think we have to go there. But I live in the now, and I know that there are still companies out there still taking fax requests, right, to onboard, you know, a dock worker somewhere, right? Not that that's a you know, a legitimate thing that's happened, right? So I think there's a lot of that's still out there.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking on the zero standing privilege piece is that it feels like it's a striving for excellence or striving for perfection. I think it's okay to strive for that. You may never get there, but you certainly probably start with, like, if you're trying to strive for fitness excellence and you have to lose 30 pounds, you start with losing 30 pounds, right? And if you don't lose all 30 pounds and you only lose 20 pounds, man, you've made a huge difference. So that's kind of the only thing I really have to say about it, because I do believe it's where we want to be. I think it solves a lot of the problems, but I also kind of agree with Steve that, like, if you aren't going to be happy until you're 100% there, or like if you really think you're going to get 100% there, you're probably going to be retired before you get there. Hopefully.
What do people typically do when they want to get to 100% of anything? They hide things, right? Oh, well, that wasn't in scope for this particular thing, right? I mean, we see that just to kind of get past audits and things like that. It happens all the time. I'm not saying that I agree with it. I'm just saying that it does happen. So,
not that
and then the other part
it.
too is the frictionless part, right? So it's great to say we're going to have a zero standing privilege. You must go through this to be able to get that privilege. If that privilege takes a week, you're done, right? You from a UX perspective, people aren't going to tolerate that. They may have to tolerate it, but your feedback from your constituents is going to be just awful. Now this identity program implemented this thing, and now it takes me a week to get access to things. Whereas, you know, like I said, mentioned the policy-based stuff that's done at runtime, if you meet the criteria of the policy to get access to the resource, you get it. If you don't meet the criteria or the context, you don't. You know, it sounds simple, but the prerequisites to get to that point are exactly the same. And this is, I'm circling back again, but the same issues that we run into for authorization historically related to IGA programs, i.e. Jeff's favorite role-based access control that everybody wants to have. The prerequisites are the same. You still need the same data. You still need to do all the same heavy lifting in order to be able to implement the runtime or policy-based access control as you did before. There's still no mechanism for us to go in and say, I understand what every role permission and entitlement means in all 500 of my applications that are vastly different because different administrators created them in different models in every single one. That still has to be business readable for it to be something that we can even put into a policy. And there has to be change control around it. So if we're building a policy after something that's an authorization model that exists in applications A, B, C, D, and E, and someone makes a change in those and it breaks the policy, well, then you're in trouble too. So there's a lot of prerequisites. I don't want to make it seem to folks like we're saying, hey, just go ahead and do policy-based access control. It's a wonderful miracle thing that you just wave a magic wand and it solves your role-based access control problem, because it's not. You still have to do the heavy lifting and the hard work.
Well, to do policy, you have to have data to support those policies. So,
right.
And
clean data
maps back to the data, clean data, sparkling data.
Yeah.
All right. We're well over an hour, so we should probably start to wrap things up. Steve, what's your favorite dinosaur?
I'll go. I can see by Jim's hat what his might be. I don't want to give anything away here, but that's pretty fancy. I'm gonna just take the easy route and say Tyrannosaurus Rex, because it was the badass of the dinosaur world. So I'll take that one.
The badass with the short arms.
Yeah.
Jim, is the Triceratops your favorite, or is that just the hat you wear because that's a team you like?
No, it's actually just a golfing hat. It's not a team that I like. So I knew you were going to ask this question, right? So I kind of had some time to come up with an answer. I really just picked the hat because I thought it was cool looking. But then I was thinking, okay, going to the gym, and I had this whole story. It's like, I would never pick T-Rex because his arms are so small. Like, you got to work your arms, bro. The Triceratops, I got a lot of respect for. He's like this short fire plug guy who puts like 500 pounds on his back and squats it 10 times. So yeah, I'm all about the Triceratops.
All right. Well, I'm going to go with the chicken. Chickens are delicious and they are a dinosaur. They're actually from the same family of a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Really?
There you go. I feel like I want to change my answer now to some dinosaur that could fly too. I think that'd be a pretty cool thing. So,
pterodactyl
maybe,
or something.
Yeah, pterodactyl, something like that too. So pick the chicken up and
chicken are delicious. I love wings. So, crack me off some of those whenever you feel like it.
Pterodactyl wings.
Yeah. So if you didn't learn anything today at all, just take away that chickens are part of the theropod family, which is part of the Tyrannosaurus Rex family, kind of lineage and descendancy. So, Steve, we're on the same page for the most part.
Everyone should have AI.
Everyone should have AI dinosaurs. All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up for this week. Steve, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I feel like we could have gone in so many different directions, and hopefully people are still listening to this because I think we had a lot of really good conversation towards the end there too as well. So I'll put a link in our show notes to your LinkedIn connection information so people can reach out. I'll put a link for Patrick Parker's thing around ARIA and that whole thing so people can kind of check that out. Let's see what else. We're on the web, idcpodcast.com. We're on YouTube, idcpodcast.tv. We'll take it right to it. We are almost at 1,000 subscribers, which is pretty amazing considering we don't advertise. It's all word of mouth, and hopefully people continue to check that out. And do all that stuff, fun stuff for us, like and subscribe. We've got a bunch of conferences that will be coming up soon. So InfoSec World in Orlando is next week. So by the time people are listening to this, we will be in Orlando. So if you're hearing this and you're in Orlando, stop by at InfoSec World. And then we've got Identiverse in, Washington, D.C., but it's really more like Maryland, National Harbor, whatever that is. We'll be there. And then Gartner in Grapevine, Texas within the year. So lots of discounts for everything. So go to our webpage, idcpodcast.com. You'll see all the current discounts there. And I just did put up the Gartner one, which was released last week. So people can check that out. So, all right, with that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. Thanks, everyone, for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.